Our topic today has to do with multiplying integers on a number line. The essential question is, how do you find the product when multiplying integers? And the product is the answer to a multiplication problem. So a reminder is multiplication is the same as repeated addition and subtraction. So in the past, you've learned that the first factor tells you how many groups there are. Okay. And the second factor tells you how many are in each group. So what I mean by that, if you had 2 times 3, that 2 tells you how many groups there are. So there's this first factor tells you there's 2 groups. Then that second factor tells you that there's going to be 3 in each of those 2 groups. So that would give us a product, which is the answer to our multiplication problem, of 6. So here's another way it can be modeled. It could be modeled pictorially. So there's going to be 2 groups. And there's going to be 3 in each of those groups. And then the 3 plus the 3 gives us the 6. Because multiplication is the same as repeated addition or subtraction, depending on the context. Yes, I want you to write this out. True or false? 5 times negative 3 is the same as negative 3 plus a negative 3 plus a negative 3 plus a negative 3 plus a negative 3. Are those the same thing? Will you get the same answer? So flip to the reverse side to see how to represent multiplying on a number line using vectors. Okay, so I want you to highlight this when you have a positive first factor times a second factor. That's positive. And that's going to give you a positive product. So if you have a positive first factor times a positive second factor, your answer will be a positive product. So like this example right here, 3 times 2, which also means add 3 groups of 2. So here's a group, here's a group, here's a group, and they're all 2 in length, 2 units in length. So you're going to add 2 3 times, okay? And that puts you at 6. So 2 plus 2 plus 2 is 6, or 3 times 2 is 6, okay? That one's pretty straightforward. A positive times a positive is going to give you a positive. Okay, well, what happens if you have that first factor is positive, but then that second factor is negative? That's going to give you a negative answer. A positive times a negative will give you a negative answer. So right here, you're going to be thinking add 3 groups of negative 2. Okay? You have 3 groups of negative 2. So from here, here's one group of negative 2. Here is another group of negative 2. And right here is another group of negative 2. And you see the vectors right there? So here you got a negative 2, minus 2 more, minus 2 more. So negative 2 plus a negative 2 plus a negative 2. Is going to give you an answer of negative 6. Okay? Or we can view it as 3 times negative 2, which equals negative 6. Okay, so a positive times a negative will give you a negative answer when you're multiplying. All right, what happens if you have a negative first factor times a positive second factor? So a negative times a positive. Oops, sorry, I highlighted the wrong thing. It's kind of hard with when I'm watching through the camera. Okay, so when you have a negative times a positive, you're going to have a negative answer. Okay, sorry I highlighted that. Ignore that. So a negative 3 times 2 really means that you're going to subtract 3 groups of 2. Okay, so when you're subtracting, when you're minusing, you're going to go to the left. So here is a group of 2. Here is the second group of 2. And here is the third group of 2 that we are subtracting. Okay? So we're going to subtract 2, subtract 2, subtract 2. You're subtracting 2, there's 1, subtract 2, subtract 2. And that gives us an answer of negative 6. Or when you write it out, it would be negative 3 times 2, which gives you negative 6. Okay, now what happens if you have a negative times a negative? You're going to have a positive answer. Okay, and here's how you would think of it. Negative 3 times a negative 2 also means that you're subtracting 3 groups of negative 2. And here's, it might look really weird as we write it out, okay? So you're subtracting a negative. So when you're subtracting a negative, it's the same as adding. So here is a group of 2. So you're subtracting, you're getting rid of this negative 2, okay? And again, there's another subtracting of a negative 2. So you're subtracting this negative 2. And then again, the third group that you're subtracting, that negative 2. So you are subtracting that negative 2. Okay? So think of it like, look at it like this. You're subtracting a negative 2, subtracting a negative 2, subtracting a negative 2. And that's going to give you an answer. Okay, so right here, remember how when you're subtracting a negative, you can visualize that as adding? So that's what we see here to get that. Here's what it would look like when you multiply it. Okay, so take a second and remember, a positive times a positive gives you a positive answer. A positive times a negative gives you a negative answer. A negative times a positive gives you a negative answer. A negative times a negative gives you a positive answer, okay? Now that you've visually seen what it looks like on a number line, and hopefully you understand that, here's a quick little trick to help you remember multiplying when you're multiplying positive and negative numbers. And I do want you to draw this down here. Start off with a little tic-tac-toe board like this. And when you're filling it in, I want you to put pluses going down diagonally to the right. Okay? And then all the other ones, I want you to put minuses in there, or negatives. Okay? And here's how you would read this. For multiplication, you'd read it going this way. Okay? Multiplication, reading it this way. So for example, this first row, a positive number times a negative number will give you a negative answer. So it would kind of look like this. Like if I had positive 3 times a negative 2. So the first one's positive, the second one's negative. Would give me a negative 6 as the answer. Okay? This next row is negative times a positive will give me a negative answer. So if I had a negative 3 times a positive 2, my answer will be negative 6. Or if I had a negative 3 times a negative 2, my answer would be a positive 6. And these all match up with what I just showed you up here. A positive times a negative is a negative. Positive times a negative is a negative, as it's modeled right here. A negative times a positive is a negative. So negative times positive is a negative, as it's modeled right here. And then we have a negative times a negative, which is a positive, as it's modeled right here. Okay? Negative times a negative is a positive. And have a good day.